Mr. Hale, before we move things about, you explain to Mr. Henderson just what you saw when you came here yesterday morning.
By the way, has anything been moved? Are the things just as you left them yesterday?
It's just the same. When it dropped below 0 last night, I thought I'd better send Frank out this morning to make a fire for us. No use getting pneumonia with a big case going on, but I told him not to touch anything except for the stove, and you know Frank.
Somebody should have been left here yesterday. Well, Mr. Hale, just tell us what happened when you came here yesterday morning.
Harry and I had started to town with a load of potatoes. We came along the road from my place, and as I got here, I said, I'm going to see if I can't get John Wright to go in with me on a party phone. I spoke to Wright about it once before, and he put me off, saying folks talk too much anyway, and all he asked was peace and quiet. I guess you know about how much he talked himself, but I thought maybe if I went to the house and talked about it before his wife, though I said to Harry that I don't know if what his wife wanted made much difference to John.
Let's talk about that later, Mr. Hale. I do want to talk about that, but tell us just now what happened when you got to the house.
I didn't hear or see anything. I knocked at the door, and still it was all quiet inside. I knew they must be up. It was past 8 o'clock. So I knocked again, and I thought I heard somebody say, "Come in." I wasn't sure. I'm not sure yet. But I opened the door, this door, and there in that rocker sat Mrs. Wright.
What was she doing?
She was rocking back and forth. I had her apron in her hand and was sort of pleating it.
How did she look?
Well, she looked queer.
How do you mean queer?
Well, as if she didn't know what she was going to do next, and kind of done up.
How did she seem to feel about your coming?
Why, I don't think she minded. She didn't pay much attention. I was surprised. She didn't ask me to come up to the stove, or to sit down, but I sat there, not looking at me, so I said, "I want to see John." And then she laughed. I guess you would call it a laugh. So I said a little sharp, "Can't I see John?" "No," she says, kind of dull-like. "Ain't he home?" says I. "Yes," she says, "he's home." "Why can't I see him?" I asked her out of patience. "'Cause he's dead," she said. "Dead?" says I. She just nodded her head, not getting a bit excited, but rocking back and forth. "Why, where is he?" says I, not knowing what to say. She pointed upstairs, like that. I got up with the idea of going up there. I walked from there to here. Then I says, "What? Why? What did he die of?" "He died of a rope around his neck," said she. Well, I went out and called Harry. I thought I might need help. We went upstairs, and there he was lying.
I think I'd rather have you go into that upstairs, where you can point it all out. Just go on now with the rest of the story.
Well, my first thought was to get that rope off. But Harry, he went up to him, and he said, "No, he's dead all right, and we'd better not touch anything." So we went back downstairs. She was still sitting the same way. "Has anyone been notified?" I asked. "No," she said, unconcerned. "Who did this, Mrs. Wright?" said Harry. He said it businesslike. "I don't know," she says. "You don't know?" says Harry. "No," she said. "Weren't you sleeping in the bed with him?" says Harry. "Yes," says she, "but I was on the inside. Somebody slipped a rope around his neck and strangled him. And you didn't wake up?" says Harry. "I didn't wake up," she said after him. After a minute, she said, "I sleep sound." Harry was going to ask her more questions, but I said maybe we ought to let her tell her story first to the coroner or the sheriff. So Harry went fast as he could to the Rivers place, where there's a telephone.
And what did Mrs. Wright do when she knew that you had gone for the coroner?
She moved from that chair to this one over here, and just sat there with her hands held together and looking down. I got a feeling that I ought to make some conversation. So I said I'd come in to see if John wanted to put in a telephone, and at that she started to laugh. And then she stopped and looked at me, scared. I guess that's all I know that you don't.
I guess we'll go upstairs first, and then out to the barn and around there. You're convinced that there was nothing important here? Nothing that would point out to any motive?
Nothing here but the kitchen things.
Here's a nice mess. Oh, her fruit. It did freeze. She worried about that when it turned so cold. She said the fire'd go out and her jars would break.
Well, can you beat the woman? Held for murder and worrying about her preserves.
I guess before we're through, she may have something more serious than preserves to worry about.
Well, women are used to worrying over trifles.
And yet, for all their worries, what would we do without the ladies? Dirty towels. Not much of a housekeeper, would you say, ladies?
There's a great deal of work to be done on a farm.
To be sure, and yet, I know there's some Dickens County farmhouses which did not have such roller towels.
Those towels get dirty awful quick. Men's hands aren't always as clean as they might be.
Ah, loyal to your sex, I see. But you and Mrs. Wright were neighbors. I suppose you were friends, too.
I've not seen much of her of late years. I've not been in this house. It's more than a year.
And why was that? You didn't like her?
I liked her well enough. Farmers' wives have their hands full. Mr. Henderson, and then...
Yes?
It never seemed a very cheerful place.
No, it's not cheerful. I shouldn't say she had the homemaking instinct.
Well, I don't know as Wright had either.
You mean that they didn't get on very well?
No, I don't mean anything. But I don't think a place be any cheerfuler for John Wright's being in it.
I'd like to talk more of that a little later. I want to get the lay of things upstairs now.
I suppose anything Mr. Peters does will be all right. She was to take in some clothes for her, you know, and a few little things. We left in such a hurry yesterday.
Yes, but I would like to see what you take, Mrs. Peters, and keep an eye for anything that might be of use to us.
Yes, Mr. Henderson.
I'd hate to have men coming in my kitchen snooping around and criticizing.
Of course, it's no more than their duty.
Duty's all right, but I guess that deputy sheriff that came out to make the fire might have got a little of this on. I wish I'd thought of that sooner. Seems mean to talk about her for not having things slicked up when she had to come away in such a hurry. It's a shame about her fruit. I wonder if it's all gone. I think there's some here that's all right, Mrs. Peters. Yes, here. This is cherries, too. I declare I believe that's the only one. She'll feel awful bad about all her hard work in this hot weather. I remember the afternoon I put my cherries last summer.
Well, I must get those things from the front room closet. You'll come in with me, Mrs. Hale. You could help me carry them. My, it's cold in there.
Wright was close. I think maybe that's why she kept so much to herself. She didn't even belong to the Ladies' Aid. I suppose she felt she couldn't do her part. This all you was to take in?
She said she wanted an apron. She said there was in the top drawer in this cupboard. Yes, here. And then her little shawl that always hung behind the door. Yes, here it is.
Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale?
do you think she did it?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, I don't think she did. Asking for an apron and a little shawl, worrying about her fruit?
Mr. Peters says it looks bad for her. Mr. Henderson is awful sarcastic in his speech, and he'll make fun of her saying she didn't wake up.
Well, I guess John Wright didn't wake up when they was slipping that rope under his neck.
No, it's strange. It must have been done awful crafty and still. They say it was such a funny way to kill a man, rigging it all up like that.
That's just what Mr. Hale said. There was a gun in the house. He says that's what he can't understand.
Mr. Henderson said coming out that what was needed for the case was a motive, something to show anger or sudden feeling.
Well, I don't see any signs of anger around here. Wonder how they're finding things upstairs. I hope she hadn't a little more red up there. You know, it seems kind of sneaking, locking her up in town and then coming out here and trying to get her own house to turn against her.
But Mrs. Hale, the law is the law.
I suppose it is. Better loosen up your things, Mrs. Peters. You won't feel them when you go out.
She was piecing a quilt.
It's her log cabin quilt pattern. Pretty, isn't it? I wonder if she's going to quilt it up or just knot it. They wonder if she was going to quilt it or knot it.
Frank's fire didn't do much up there, did it? Well, let's go out to the barn and get that cleared up.
I don't know as there's anything so strange. Our taking up our time with little things while we're waiting for them to get this evidence. I don't see that it's anything to laugh about.
Of course, they got their awful important things on their mind.
Mrs. Peters, look at this one. Here, this one she was working on, and look at the sewing. All the rest of it has been so nice and even, and look at this one. It's all over the place. Why, it looks like she didn't even know what she was about.
Oh, what are you doing, Mrs. Hale?
Just pulling out a stitch or two that's not sewed very good. Bad sewing always makes me fidgety.
I don't think we ought to touch things.
I'll just finish up this end. Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale?
what do you suppose she was so nervous about?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know as she was nervous. I sometimes sew awful clear when I'm just tired. Well, I must get these things wrapped up. They may be through sooner than we think. I wonder where I can find a piece of paper and string.
In that cupboard, maybe.
Why, here's a bird cage. Did she have a bird, Mrs. Hale?
Why, I don't know whether she did or not. I've not been here for so long. There was a man around last year selling canaries cheap, but I don't know if she took one. Maybe she did. She used to sing real pretty herself.
Seems funny to think of a bird here. But she must have had one, or why would she have a cage? I wonder what happened to it.
I suppose maybe the cat got it.
No, she didn't have a cat. She got that feeling some people have about cats, being afraid of them. Why, look at this door. It's broke. One hinge is pulled apart.
Looks as if someone must have been rough with it.
Why, yes.
I wish if they're going to find any evidence that they'd be about it. I don't like this place.
But I'm awful glad you came with me, Mrs. Hale. It would be lonesome for me sitting here alone.
It would, wouldn't it? But I tell you what I do wish, Mrs. Peters. I wish I had come over sometimes when she was here. I wish I had.
But of course you were awful busy, Mrs. Hale. Your house and your children.
I could have come. I stayed away because I wasn't cheerful. I've never liked this place. I don't know what it is, but it's a lonesome place and always was. I wish I'd come over to see Minnie Foster sometimes.
Well, you mustn't reproach yourself, Mrs. Hale. Somehow we just don't see how it is with other folks until something comes up.
Not having children makes less work, but it makes a quiet house. And Wright was out to work all day, and no company when he did come in. Did you know John Wright, Mrs. Peters?
Not to know him. I've seen him in town. They say he was a good man.
Yes, good. He didn't drink, and he kept his word as well as most, I guess, and paid his debts. But he was a hard man, Mrs. Peters, just to pass the time of day with him, like a raw wind that gets to the bone. I should think that she wanted a bird. But what do you suppose went with it?
I don't know, unless it got sick and died.
You weren't raised around here, were you? You didn't know her.
Not till they brought her yesterday.
She was kind of like a bird herself, real sweet and pretty, but kind of timid and fluttery. How she did change. Tell you what, Mrs. Peters, why don't you take the quill with you? It might take up her mind.
Why, I think that's a real nice idea, Mrs. Hale. There couldn't possibly be any objection to it, could there? Now, just what would I take? I wonder if her patches are in here, and her things.
Here's some red. I expect that has some sewing things in it. What a pretty box. Looks like something somebody would give her. Maybe her scissors are in here. Why, there's something wrapped up in this piece of silk.
Why, this isn't her scissors.
Oh, Mrs. Peters, it's...
It's the bird.
But, Mrs. Peters, look at it. Its neck. Look at its neck. It's all other side, too.
Somebody wrung its neck.
Well, ladies, have you decided whether she was going to quilt it or knot it?
We think she was going to knot it.
Well, that's interesting, I'm sure. Has the bird flown?
We think the cat got it.
Is there a cat?
Well, not now. They're superstitious, you know. They leave.
No sign at all of anyone having come in from the outside. Their own rope. Now let's go upstairs and go over it piece by piece.